This full frame camera, my friends, had incredible potential at the time of its release. Look at the size of this thing. This is literally half the size of my Sony FX6 and has the ability to record 6K, which is insane. And you could actually do open gate recording. There are some of the quirks that have kind of held this back, and that's why it's sort of flown under the radar and people don't really use this as much. But if some of those quirks were actually fixed in a newer version of this, I mean, it could pretty much surpass an FX6, the C400, Red Komodo X, even the Pixis. I mean, incredible value. Let's talk about it. So the Lumix BS1H is a full frame camera with a 24.2 megapixel sensor. It has the ability to record up to 6K at 24 frames per second with open gate 3x2. It has a whole bunch of cropped formats and anamorphic modes, and it's got the L mount. When it comes to the I/O ports, it's got an SDI in, a timecode in and out. It has Genlock in, a HDMI, a USB-C. Over the other side, it has a 3.5mm audio jack in. It has a headphone jack out. It has a LAN connector. It can be powered through DC 12 volt power, and it has a 2.5mm remote jack. And for the dimensions, it's 93mm high, 93mm wide, and 78mm deep. And it weighs a total of 585 grams. And depending on where you buy it, you can get it for about $3,500 US. So as you saw by the specs, this thing is absolutely packed with a whole bunch of features. It is a pretty incredible camera for what you actually get, particularly because of the price. There are some pros, but we do have to talk about the cons after the pros, because that could be the determining factor if you're going to be buying this or not, or if I'm actually going to be buying this or not. Still not 100% sure, but hopefully I will find that out by the end of this video. Now, the reason why I wanted to try the BS1H is that it is a box style camera, and box style cameras are pretty modular. You can pretty much rig them out however you want. Now, I don't actually have a specific cage for the BS1H. It is a loaner camera. It's got to go back to Lumix, so I don't really want to buy a cage specifically for this video. I just wanted to see what this camera would be like and potentially maybe have it in my arsenal, because it really just depends on image quality, obviously the features that you get, and the overall value and price and what you can actually do with the camera. And so far so good. Like, I love the actual mounting points on the actual body. You've got 3 at the top, 3 on the sides, and then you've got 2 at the bottom. So there's a whole bunch of mounting points for a cage, or if you don't have a cage, there still are really nice mounting points on here. The great thing about this box style camera, it's very modular. You can build it up to however you want, but obviously there are some cons that you do have to take into consideration, which we'll talk about later on with this style of camera. And sure, the way I actually use these kind of cinema cameras is that I'll have them fully rigged out and I'll have a monitor on there at all times. But because this is such a small camera, you can put this in some pretty tight situations and spots that you normally wouldn't put a larger cinema camera. Like, I probably wouldn't mount my FX6 exactly how I've been mounting it inside my truck. And you know, just this camera being so small, it just makes it so much easier to mount in different situations. But also, in saying that, once you put a lens on there, a battery, and potentially a monitor, it's not really that small in comparison to, say, like the Lumix S5 IIX or even just a smaller Sony ZV-E1. But now, I guess this is where we would have to talk about image quality. And this is, I guess, technically a Sony sensor inside the body, but they've done something with the processing and obviously like the color science, what they actually do to the image. It's been pretty incredible using this. I am pretty used to this when it comes to my Lumix S5 IIX, image quality. So it is very similar to that. But just the way that Vlog grades, it's so easy to work with straight, out of the gate. You don't really have to massage it as much and get it to, looking good as what you would do with a S-Log 3 footage. You kind of have to work with it a little bit more. That's just my opinion, but I really do love the tonality and colors that comes out of the Lumix cameras. And I know it would be personal preference anyway. Image quality is pretty subjective in certain circumstances, but we do have to talk about the frame rates as well. So when I do compare it to my Lumix S5 this does seem a little bit more decorated when it comes to the frame rates. Now, this is a cheaper body and they have literally thrown everything and the kitchen sink directly in the S5 Like, this thing is insane when it comes to recording frame rates. You can actually do ProRes internal as well if you actually record to an SSD, whereas the BS1H can't do that. Now, when it comes to the intra frame rates, you do get a little bit higher bit rate in the Lumix S5 compared to the BS1H. That I think does maximum 400 megabits per second, whereas this one can do up to 600 megabits per second when it comes to MOV files. When it comes to obviously ProRes, that is definitely a higher bitrate file. But still, you get very similar image quality out of both these cameras, but you do get just a little bit more with the S5 And now we have reached that time where anamorphic lenses are now becoming extremely affordable, specifically with, 2 times anamorphic lenses. This camera offers you open gate recording, and 3x2 is pretty important when you actually have 2 times anamorphics, but not just 3x2 open gate. You actually have 4x3 in the APS-C crop, which is really great for APS-C anamorphics, because I actually do have a whole bunch of APS-C anamorphics as well, which is really great to have the ability to use the anamorphic lenses to its full potential, because if you do actually use it on just a regular 16:9 sensor, you've got so much on the sides that you're going to have to crop off. This just stops you from wasting so much footage on the sides and really capitalize on that anamorphic framing. Now, in terms of slow motion, the BS1H can do 120 frames per second, but it is full HD and it is long op. It's not exactly the greatest file. You can see it's a little bit noisy in the shadows, but overall, it's not bad for 1080p, but it definitely isn't as good as my FX6's 4K at 120 frames per second. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of a dynamic range test. Now, this isn't going to be scientific at all. I don't have a Xyla chart, so I can't test the scientific values of dynamic range, but we're going to bring up the shadows, we'll decrease the highlights and see what we can get out of this. Now, this is on the Sony a7 IV. This is meant to be one of the best dynamic range cameras in the Sony lineup. And obviously it's not going to be completely scientific, it's just practical, but there's probably not going to be too much of a difference between these cameras anyway. And it really does come down to how you grade the footage at the end of the day. Now, one thing I did notice with this test is the optical low pass filter. Essentially, you're just going to get less moire in the image. You can see the a7 IV has moire on the fly screen, whereas the BS1H doesn't have any moire, which is really cool. And if you are filming a lot of intricate patterns and stuff on t-shirts, the BS1H is going to be so much better than the a7 IV. Now, I guess the I/O ports has to be a bit of a pro when it comes to this camera. It does have SDI out, but also HDMI out as well. So it's got both, just like my Sony FX6. It is really great to have SDI because BNC cables is far more used in professional equipment, and it's just a better connection as well. But I guess having both of these is obviously a plus. Now, one of the gripes when it comes to my FX6 is not having a 3.5mm jack on the body, and people have gone on about this for ages, and so have I, because it is pretty annoying. But I don't really use microphones when it comes to the 3.5mm jack, but I mean, if you take that top handle off, you've got zero audio. This one has 3.5mm on the body, which is fantastic, and you can actually monitor it through the headphone jack as well. And when it comes to durability and having this on set and recording times, this will obviously record for pretty much forever of how much battery power or LAN power that you've actually got going into here, because it's got a fan. It's not going to overheat, and that is a really good thing to have. Okay, so now we got to move on to some of the things that I don't like, and hopefully we can see fixes with this in a Mark II if they end up coming out with a second version. And that comes down to a screen. There is absolutely no screen on this. So you actually have to hook this up to your PC. You actually have to hook it up to a monitor to see what is actually going on and what you're actually going to be changing when it comes to the settings on this thing. And it can kind of get a little bit annoying if you do want to, throw this on the car. You do want to just change a whole bunch of settings, and you're not able to do that unless you hook a monitor up to it. And even if it was very similar to, let's say, the Z-Cam cameras, where they literally just have a very, very small screen at the top so you can see some basic settings, that would have been nice. But there isn't a screen on here, and that is a bit of a shame when it comes to the usability of it straight out of the box. Now, one of the most amazing features that I absolutely love about the FX6 is the internal ND filters, and obviously this doesn't have it. It is a very small body. Maybe they couldn't cram in ND filters in here, so that kind of does suck that it doesn't have those ND filters, but obviously you can just use the ones on the front of the lens, or just if you do actually have an adapter that has the ND filters on it, you use that one. Also, another con about this, it comes down to IBIS. It doesn't have any sort of in-body image stabilization, which does suck. And it also doesn't have any digital stabilization that I've actually seen in this as well. You know, the Lumix S5 is an incredible camera when it comes to stability. The IBIS is incredible. And on top of that IBIS, you do have that digital stabilization. It literally is like using a gimbal. It's pretty phenomenal. And while we're looking at this footage, yeah, you can see autofocus. The autofocus is pretty much unusable. It's pretty trash. It's contrast detection. It doesn't have the newer phase detection autofocus that's in the S5 and like the GH7. So it's not going to be that great. And that's probably one of the biggest downsides of what Lumix had forever is autofocus. Now it's fixed, but with this camera, absolutely terrible. And yeah, I just hate autofocus in this camera. One thing I'd love to see in a newer version of this is not having dual SD cards. I'd prefer to have CF Express Type B cards because obviously they're a lot faster, they're much more durable, but most of the new Lumix cameras have the ability to do ProRes RAW internally into their cameras, specifically the GH7. So it would be pretty incredible if you could cram, you know, ProRes RAW directly into this. It would make it an absolute powerhouse. But I won't be buying this camera. It's just, I really need a screen on here. It'd just be so much easier to actually have a screen, particularly in those situations that I said. And I don't like trying to attach a screen onto it all the time. That's not, you know, specifically built for this. I just love to be able to go through the settings and change it really quickly on the fly. Just the way that I use it, like if this is a studio camera, if this was a crash camera, then I mean, it's perfectly fine. All you need to do is just mount it in that specific situation, set the camera, and you're good to go. But I think I'll wait for a newer version of this. If Lumix actually do make a newer version, not 100% sure if this is the kind of thing that they're going to be doing in the future, because I'm not sure how these sold. I don't think they sold very well because of the few quirks, but it definitely is a bit of a dark horse when it comes to the box style cinema cameras. So anyway, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, and yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.